So welcome everybody, and thank you for attending Fourth Friday 40 Leadership Series. It's a year-long monthly webinar for leaders of all levels to promote professionalism, optimize influence, and help you to facilitate achievement. In short, we want to help you to be stronger, smarter, and more successful leaders. As a reminder, this series was developed in concert with GBA's Multimedia Delivery Committee. Hello, I'm Joel Carson, the Executive Director of the Geoprofessional Business Association. And as always, I'm so thrilled that so many of you are looking for ways to accelerate your leadership skills. And now I have the pleasure to introduce you to Glodine Champion. Glodine is a transformational leader who specializes in personal growth, leadership, development, and diversity and equity and inclusion. She works with individuals and organizations to get to the root cause of culturally based challenges by transforming beliefs, behaviors, and assumptions. She's also a keynote speaker, and she will be a keynote speaker at GBA's 2023 Spring Conference this April. She's in very high demand, and she's joining us today where she's attending other events in Houston, Texas. Please join me in welcoming Glodine Champion to Fourth Friday 40. Welcome, Glodine.
Yay, thank you. Thank you. Look at all that love. I'm already appreciating being here. Thank you. All right, well then let's get going, shall we?
Yes.
So welcome to my anti-DEI webinar, and you'll understand why I'm calling it anti-DEI in a moment. As Joel said, I'm Glodine Champion. And one of the things I feel is most important is to help you all understand why I do this work. One is because race is causing division in the country and the world, like I say, but it's also costing us happiness and peace of mind and connection. And worst of all, lives. And in the space of DEI, I did my first DEI initiative in 1994. That was back when we were fighting prejudice. And back in those days, they would just grab people of color from business units and pull us together and say, help us solve this problem. I've been doing it for a long time, but the reason I got involved, this is my mother, and my mom adopted me as a single parent. She actually made history in California. They had a project from 1965 to 1967, and my mom was one of 29 Black women that were allowed to adopt as single parents. And she was very committed to being intentional about the way that she raised me. And unfortunately, in 1984, when I was a senior in high school, my mom was on the phone at her job, and this was back when, you had to hold the handset to your head, and her boss tapped her on the shoulder. And one thing that was my mom's biggest pet peeve was being interrupted when she was on the phone. So she put her hand up to say, just a second, and accidentally hit her supervisor in the face. And what resulted from that was her supervisor calling the police and accusing my mother of attacking her. And my mom, at 60 years old, was walked off her job in handcuffs and lost her pension and her retirement and had to go on welfare. And that experience, I didn't realize it at the time. I totally get it now. That experience broke her spirit. And my mom was an amazing woman, but the woman that she was after this happened was not that same person. And so I do this work because I don't want anyone to have that happen to them. And there's a way to get people to open their mind by creating some level of comfort to move through the discomfort. I know that there was a way that situation could have been resolved without calling the police. So anyway, that is why I do this work. And one of the problems that I see with this work is that the issue of diversity, equity, and inclusion has been unresolved for a very, very long time. And the question is, why haven't we been able to come to a resolution? And I believe, now this is my opinion, which I hold very highly, This is my opinion, but I believe that this is heart-based work. And if we can't connect with each other at that level, it's going to be a lot harder to do because we keep intellectualizing it, which makes diversity become this, my issue is more important than your issue. I remember 3 years ago when people would talk to me about DEI, my attitude was, if you're not focusing on Black people, then what are you doing? And then all these DEI initiatives popped up in the wake of George Floyd. So then my question was, are you guys doing this to make it more equitable, give more Black people opportunities? And it was like, well, Black people's issues are more important than anyone else's. And I realized that doesn't help solve this issue either, right? Because we got to figure out a way so that we're not making it, so that it's not pitting difference against difference. And then equity implies someone has to give up something in order for someone else to get something, which is why affirmative action was so wildly successful. That was sarcasm. The challenge here is that there's enough to go around, right? So it shouldn't be looked at in I'm going to lose something if I give this person something. That's one thing. And then the last piece of this is based on how I was raised. My mom told me that I belong wherever I can either afford to be or want to be. She took me to really nice restaurants from the time I was old enough to sit in the chair without a high chair. She made sure that I felt comfortable wherever I was. And so I kind of moved through the world with the attitude that I belong wherever I want to be or can afford to be. And I believe that when we talk about inclusion, we talk about it in a way that makes it seem like somebody else needs to give us permission to belong, which creates all kind of internal angst, which then we project out into the world, and then we get all kind of angst at us, thrown back at us. So I just feel like these three words aren't really the issue. The issue is more about, or excuse me, the approach using DEI that way is that when you do, I've done initiatives where they want to teach systemic racism and really dig into bias, but I don't feel like that brings people together. What it does is what you see here. The leaders think that because you took a workshop or you took a series of workshops that everything is kumbaya, but usually white employees walk away and leaders walk away feeling villainized, and people of color feel victimized. And whatever silos were existing in the organization before, now people are double downing on, I'm gonna stay in my little bubble so that I don't say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing. And that does not serve to move us closer toward one another. I'm wondering if anyone can relate to this. This is my friend Scott. And he and I met when I was consulting for another company, and I kind of became his trusted advisor, and we became friends. And I hadn't seen him in I'd say a few months when I started this DEI work. And when I told him what I was doing, he groaned when he heard me say DEI. And I was like, what's that about? And he said, what you see here, when I hear DEI, I brace myself for someone telling me how I'm the cause of the race problem or pointing out what I'm doing wrong. And I think a lot of white men feel that way. So that doesn't help us actually move toward connection either, right? If some people are thinking that they're doing something wrong or they're feeling some kind of way, and maybe some of you can put in the chat if you feel that way. There's no right or wrong to this. And so placing blame and making people feel some kind of way doesn't help us solve the problem either, right? You can see this is all kind of work that we're doing, and maybe some of you have done some of these things, but you haven't noticed a change in your organization. And I think it's because we've been doing the same thing for years, expecting different results, kind of a bit like insanity, right? So what if we take a new approach? Perhaps we will get different results. Now, the first thing is to just acknowledge that we all have stuff. There's stereotypes, there's biases, there's prejudices, and there's bigotry. The only way we're going to change any of that is at an individual level. right? We can't just go out with the paintbrush and tell everybody that now you're no longer a bigot, or you're no longer prejudiced or biased or stereotyped, or that stereotypes don't exist. And then you have to accept that no one is 100% anything. And some stereotypes are true. I like to tell people, if the stereotype about you, and I'll use myself as an example, the first time that I went to Ghana, I noticed how colorful everyone was. And then I looked at what I was wearing at the time, and I was colorful myself. And I realized that the stereotype about Black people being colorful is true. If I am on the continent of Africa looking at colorful people, and when I am at home in the United States looking at the colorful Black people that I know, the way we dress, and I myself am colorful, then why would I get upset if somebody said, "You're so colorful"? Because it's true, right? I was in the optometrist not too long ago, and I had on yellow pants. And when I say yellow, I mean sunshine, like sunshine yellow, and a red shirt and red shoes. And I walked in, and the woman said, "Oh my God, you're so," it was a white woman in the waiting room. She said, "Oh my God, you're so beautiful and you're so colorful." And I said, "Thank you, just like the sun, right?" And she said, "Yeah." And then I sat down. And then I thought to myself, 10 years ago, I would have been pissed off that she said that, like, just because it's a stereotype. And so I think sometimes we miss out on the truth of the stereotype. And when you can do that, then you don't get upset when someone says something that's true. Yes, I am colorful. Thank you very much. It's so freeing to just be able to own the pieces that belong to you and let the ones that don't drift aside. Now, here is the interesting thing, and changed my whole perspective to the way DEI should be approached. In 2021, after being in my home for a year and a half, terrified to get behind the wheel of my car, to be out in public, to be in the wrong space. I didn't want to get Karen'd. I didn't want to get pulled over by the police. And I didn't like living in fear. That's not how I operate. So I decided that I was going to drive across the country, because it felt like we were being more divided than usual. And were we really on the brink of civil war? Because that's how it felt. And my brother was getting married in Little Rock, Arkansas. So I decided to drive to his wedding. But in the space of driving to his wedding, I also wanted to talk to people along the way about love. And I actually left Little Rock, Arkansas, and drove as far south as Macon, Georgia. And I'm going to say I talked to over 100 people. Most of them did not look like me. And some of them looked like they didn't even want to talk to somebody like me. This is another assumption that we make, but I had to say to myself, you're doing this to understand if people believe love is the bridge. So you have to be the love that you want to see. You can't shy away from asking someone because you think they're prejudiced or racist, right? This is how we can. And so I talked to over 100 people. Not one person turned me away. And this is just a snapshot of some of the people that I got to talk to when I actually had the sign, because you see that's a handmade sign. I did all this on the fly. And everyone agreed that love is the bridge that connects us. And my favorite story happened in in Alabama. Was crossing the state line in Alabama, and there's the Welcome to Sweet Home Alabama sign. And I was like, oh, great, I'm going to stop and get something to eat. And then 100 feet, no, maybe I'm going to say 500 feet, 1,000 feet beyond, standing tall above the trees, I saw the Confederate flag. And I was like, nope, I'm not stopping here. And then I saw a Cracker Barrel sign. And if anyone has had Cracker Barrel pancakes, you know why I pulled off the freeway, but I had to have pancakes. And this is the hostess. When I came in, she greeted me and we started talking. And right away, she othered me. That's usually what people do when they feel uncomfortable, is they say something to remind you. So in her case, she said something to remind me that I was Black, just in case maybe I forgot when I woke up that morning. I don't get upset about these things because, again, if I'm gonna really research this love concept, then I need to understand what's driving it. And I stayed in the conversation with her, and I asked her to seat me near the window so I could keep an eye on my dog. And just like almost on cue, as I sat down, Tashi, my dog, popped up in the driver's seat. And as soon as the hostess saw her and all her cuteness, the conversation just shifted. Now, because during our conversation, she let me know we were on different sides of the political aisle. And, we had that uncomfortable conversation that people have when you want to engage in conversation, but you don't want to say the wrong thing, and you wind up saying the wrong thing anyway. The minute she saw Tashi, now we're talking about our dogs. We had that commonality. She had dogs, and now she's telling me about her dogs. I'm telling her about Tashi and all her shenanigans on our road trip, and there were plenty. And when the waitress came over to take my order, the hostess told her to take really good care of me because I was a VIP, because we had had this beautiful conversation. Race and all that other stuff that we started off talking about went by the wayside because we found that commonality between the two of us. And so I came back home from that trip. This Let's Talk About Love tour was one of the things that came out of that. But the other thing that came out of that was me understanding that what people need to understand is how to connect so that we can have DEI initiatives that aren't really even about DEI per se. Like we don't have to use those words to have the same impact. If you have an organization, you're a leader that is a heart-based leader, then diversity just becomes your choice to have a team that represents the country, if you will. Equity is something that you won't have to overthink, and inclusion will happen naturally when people feel comfortable with each other. And so what if we took race and difference out of the conversation? Because in my opinion, based on my road trip, it's not about that. What it's about is our emotions. And for anyone who saw the movie Inside Out, it's my favorite movie, and now it's my DEI teaching movie. We all come into the world full of joy. It's not until we're introduced to other people that fear, sadness, disgust, and anger, and all the other emotions show up. And so I started thinking, all right, how do we maintain our joy in the face of all of that? And part of it is just understanding what influences our emotions, or the memories that we had, or the experiences that we have, and ultimately our behavior, our personality. I feel like character and personality are two different things. Personality is something that people lean into as an explanation for why they behave badly in a "this is who I am, just deal with it" kind of way. Whereas character is something you get to choose from day to day. I choose to be a good person. I choose to be open and receptive and listen to people and speak my truth in a kind and loving way. Or maybe it's your background or your socioeconomics. If you didn't grow up around people of color, or you're a person of color that didn't grow up around white people, that's going to influence the way that you behave when you're in that environment. Or maybe it was your culture or fears, whatever fears that you have around difference or race or judgment, or any traumas, any experiences that you had in your past that you're still carrying with you. And here's the thing. For most folks, what's driving the bus is fear, judgment, and trauma. And so if you're in that space, moving through your day-to-day, anything that happens in your workplace, you're still driving through that fear, judgment, and trauma, even if you may not, and when I say you, I mean your employees, but maybe you guys as leaders as well. But you have to understand that these three things specifically affect your DEI initiatives, actually all your initiatives. People's emotions and their resistance to change is what really gets in the way more than anything. So as leaders, here's what you can do, is just to understand there's going to be denial. People that are saying this isn't really happening, or why is this happening? We don't really need this. I think with the biggest problem with DEI initiatives is that it feels forced on people. And when it feels forced on people, they're even more resistant to change because they don't understand why it's happening. So there's going to be denial that this isn't happening. And then there's going to be resistance. This is never going to work for whatever reason. Or there's going to be exploration, maybe I can do this, or maybe I can get through this or understand this in a better way, until ultimately they get to commitment. Now, here's the thing. Okay, this is happening. I can handle it. The thing is, everyone comes into this at different places. Some people start off with resistance and move to commitment relatively quickly if they understand why this is happening. Some people move from denial to resistance to just lost my exploration, sorry, to commitment. And they can go back and forth. And so your job as a leader is to just make sure that you are there to listen and ask the right questions. And again, continue to explain the whys so people can move through their commitment. The other thing you want to do is make sure that first you recognize your discomfort and get comfortable being uncomfortable. And then you recognize their discomfort, especially for people who are in denial or in resistance. Resistance, you can tell immediately, because people who are in resistance will tell you all the reasons why it's not going to work, or they will ask questions that you've already answered 12 times, almost in a way to beat you down so you don't make this change. So you got to help them get comfortable being uncomfortable as well. And then you got to listen with integrity and a willingness to learn. I know that sometimes it's hard to hear something that maybe you don't have personal experience with, but the best thing that you can do, rather than shut the person down or perhaps tell them how they're wrong or they're looking at it the wrong way, is to just listen. Like I listened to the woman in the Cracker Barrel. I'd like to tell people, create your own Cracker Barrel experiences, be around people that don't have the same viewpoint as you do, and then do everything in your power to just listen to them. Because I believe, and it's true, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, people need to be heard, to need to know that they are heard. And here's the thing, when you can give someone the space to be heard, 9 times out of 10, once they say it, sometimes people hear the craziness that they say. And then they're like, and then it opens a conversation like, oh, I just said, whatever that is. Or you hear the thing that they maybe didn't catch, and something on your face registers to them that they said something. And now you're having a conversation like, what did you hear? Or you're telling them, like, I heard you say this. What did you mean by that? I think that a lot of times we don't ask that extra question. That question usually comes out, what's that supposed to mean? Which comes out in a tone that makes people push back, and then you're in an argument. But when you can just ask somebody, what do you mean by that? And you're giving them a chance to think about, what did I mean by that? And if they were trying to be difficult, or if they were trying to be a jerk, it becomes very evident to them, and they get to make a different choice. And then you got to be open-minded. While it may be true that you know what you know, and you know what you don't know, what's also very, very true is that you don't know what you don't know. And so when you can create space to listen to what someone else is saying and be willing to take those, even if they're ideas that sound crazy, if you can just, like I said, listen and then open your mind to the possibilities, it's in the space of that possibility that you could create something, a better relationship, a better line of communication, whatever it is. And then be willing to be vulnerable. I promise you, I really do. I promise you that no one has ever died for saying, I don't know, or can you help me with, or anything like that. I think that the biggest detriment to us is that vulnerability in the dictionary makes it sound like it's a weakness. But I am all about, in full agreement with Brene Brown, that vulnerability is a strength. And the more that you can be vulnerable for your employees, for your team, it just changes the way that they see you, the way that they respect you, the way that they engage with you, because they know, I mean, first of all, we all know we're human, but for some reason, when someone gets a title, they become superhuman. And there's this unspoken belief that you have to know everything. And I think that it does a disservice. So when you can say, I don't know, let me find out, or help me understand, it really does a lot to bring people together. And then show empathy. Now, here's the thing. I know that you cannot empathize with me as a Black woman, because unless you're a Black woman, let me rephrase that. I'm a 6 foot tall Black woman. So my experience in the world is different than other people's experiences. um, I still find it interesting. People, I was a band nerd. I was like target practice for bullies, but I never got bullied. But it was because I was taller than everybody, and I was willing to be vulnerable and poke fun at myself. So I'm saying that you can't have empathy for me as a Black woman because you're not in my skin, right? So that's not the thing that you empathize with. If I am your employee, and I'm working on a team and I'm the only Black person, and I come to you and I say that so and so, maybe it's a white employee that you've known for a long time, I tell you that they said something to me that made me feel uncomfortable or made me feel disrespected, then the empathy comes with you recognizing that I feel disrespected. And that's what you're empathizing with. You know what it feels like to be disrespected. So the color of someone's skin, my experience as a Black woman, disrespect is disrespect. And that's the thing that you empathize with, rather than saying, oh, so-and-so would never do something like that, because so-and-so probably has done something like that before and no one ever said anything about it. So just because you don't know the thing happened doesn't mean that it didn't happen. And this is what I call leaning into love, right? Listening with an intent to learn open-mindedly with vulnerability and empathy. And I know that this is an organization that gets the love thing, so I don't have to drive that point home because you all get that you're love in action, but you just got to stay in the conversation and create conversations for other people to stay in. Because my mom created a diverse world for me, and I know that connection is possible if we make a conscious choice to work within ourselves first. So this is my friend base now. And if you all remember that guy in the upper left-hand corner, Steve Farver is one of my really good friends, but my friend base looks like the United Nations of Benetton for a reason. Because people are people, and I connect with the human spirit and not with the person or the color of their skin. And I think that if we can get everyone to look at each other that way, we don't have to call it DEI anymore. And when we can approach it with love, we can begin to have these open communications and higher collaboration. People are going to be more willing to collaborate with each other if they can communicate with each other and if they feel connected. People are going to be more willing to authentically connect with each other. I think sometimes people are authentically performative in workplaces where they don't feel comfortable, and that doesn't serve anyone. We can heighten our awareness and expand our understanding and move from a culture of tolerance to one of high regard. I think we tolerate a lot of bad behavior when we don't have to. And if you have the foundation, this love principle, and understanding where people are really coming from, you can build a culture of high regard. And then employees are happier, which makes your customers happier. And then you improve productivity, engagement, and increase profitability. And I got to say this, I wish that I could quantify it. I'm a Six Sigma Black belt. I do work in process improvement. And the work that I have done in process improvement has helped me see that when teams aren't collaborating, aren't communicating effectively, you can't even put a price tag on the productivity, on the impact that it's having to your productivity, because you don't see it. It's not something that you see people complaining to each other because so-and-so didn't listen to X, or somebody gave an idea and somebody else shot it down. And that banter that's happening creates resistance in and of itself. So I like to call when it's not done right, when it's not done in a way that brings people together, then you're having all sorts of hidden costs that you're paying for that you don't see. So when you can approach DEI with love, you create a best place to work for everyone. And that's what I am hoping for the world, because I know that if you transform the heart, the mind, no matter how resistant, will follow. And I have transformed a lot of resistant minds, so I'm speaking from experience. All right, that is it. Thank you so much.
Glodine, this was powerful. Thank you so much for spending your time with us today.
Of
And I
course.
don't know if you've been able to follow the chats, but the chats have been very supportive of your message. So many thank yous. This is the best Fourth Friday leadership series that some have seen. Emphasis that vulnerability is the new superpower. And so and communication, the importance of communication. So the chat was just lively today. We do also have some great questions for you to follow up. And a reminder, if you haven't seen it yet, Ryan White has shared all your contact information in the chat. And so you can look at the chat there to follow up with Glodine. Glodine, what is your best tip to overcome unconscious bias situations?
Okay, I'm going to say something so controversial, for brace yourself. I don't believe I don't believe bias can be unconscious. And I'll tell you why, but I'll tell you how to handle it. But I first want to help you understand how people are thinking. Bias in and of itself is a conscious thing, right? You recognize it because we've been conditioned a certain way. So I think that if it's you, I don't know really the whole point of the question. If it's the person asking the question is dealing with unconscious bias, or dealing with someone who has unconscious bias. But I would say that the best way to address it is if it's the person directly, is in the moment when you, okay, hold on a second, let me say this differently. The reason I don't believe in unconscious bias is because when we do something that's hurtful to somebody else, we feel it somewhere. Or something in our brain tells us not to do that thing, not to say that thing, and we say it anyway. So I would say take a moment to check in with yourself to make sure that the decision that you're making is not based on bias, that it's based on reality. And if it's someone else, then ask them that same question. And again, I think it comes back to asking the question, if someone did something, what made you do that? Because in the space of asking what made you do that, they have to start thinking about, well, what did make me do that? And so even if it appears unconscious, it becomes becomes conscious very quickly. Does that make sense?
Makes sense, yes.
Okay, that made sense in my head. I just
and the next question strikes close to me because GBA is full of people who are very smart, technical experts, very technically oriented people. And so the question was, how do you engage with technically oriented people into vulnerability?
Okay, that's a great question. I worked in tech. I worked in IT for a long time, so I get that question. First, finding a commonality. I think that what helps people, because I think a lot of technical people, and this is maybe a stereotype, but I think because they're literal, it's hard to be technical and not be literal. Does that make sense? And so for people who think literally, you have to find a commonality so that you can bring them into the conversation. Otherwise, you're talking at them, right? And they're hearing it literally, or they're hearing it in a way that you may not be intending it. So I think that it helps to first create some level of connection. I always like when I work with IT companies, I like to say, how many of you speak to the audience, or how many of you just say how you feel? Because that helps me see how they think and where they're coming from. And most people say they think they speak how they feel. They tell the issue as they see it. And I help them understand you got to reach your audience. And so it's a reverse as well. Just as much as tech people have to be able to communicate to someone who may not fully understand it, someone who's not tech needs to find a way to connect so that they can create that space for vulnerability. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally.
Okay.
It strikes true to me. as a engineer.
Yeah, that was the word I was looking for. I work with a lot of engineers, and they're like, "Well, why are you making?" And I'm very elaborate when I talk, and they're like, "Why are you using all those extra words?" So I'm like, "Okay, when I'm talking to you, I'll just cut to the chase."
Well, I want to thank you, Glodine, for calling in today from Houston, Texas, and sharing your message with us. It was so powerful to me, and again, so many wonderful comments in the chat. They just loved your message.
Awesome.
To quote one of the chats.
Thank
I
you.
want to also thank everybody that joined the webinar today. You're obviously strong leaders. Because you're taking time out of your day to learn and grow. And that's just so important.